Greetings, night owls. Thanks for joining tonight's tale. First time here, consider subscribing to keep the stories alive. Let me know your location in the comments. Time to begin. The sky over the city wasn't the color of dusk or dawn. It was the sickly, bruise-like hue of a world holding its breath, stained by distant plumes of black smoke that rose not from industry but from the pyres of a collapsing society. This is not a story of a slow, shambling apocalypse you can outwalk with a muttered curse and a firm pace. This is a story of speed, of a primal, terror-driven calculus where a single stumble, a single gasped breath taken at the wrong moment, meant being swallowed by a tide of relentless, snarling hunger. Our story begins not on the ground, but above it, on the cracked tar paper skin of a forgotten apartment complex, where the air is thick with the scent of fear and rust. My name is Leo, and the last 19 hours of my life have been a single, continuous, heart-pounding sprint across a jagged landscape of rooftops, a desperate chess game played not on squares but on precipices, with pawns made of human beings and nights of pure, unadulterated dread. It started with the sirens, a chorus that quickly choked into silence, replaced by a new soundscape, the distant percussion of glass shattering, the intermittent staccato of gunfire that grew fewer and farther between with each passing hour, and underneath it all, a low, wet, guttural chorus. A sound that didn't belong to any animal you could name, a sound that was once human. They called them runners in the final, fragmented broadcasts, a laughably benign term for what they were. Their origin is a mystery buried under the collapse of governments and networks. Some whispered it was a lab-born fever that burned away everything but the engine of consumption. Others spoke of an ancient curse, a punishment for a crowded, screeching modernity, a demon from old myths of the ravenous dead given flesh in our time. The why didn't matter when you saw one move. They didn't shamble, they coiled. They erupted from alleyways with the explosive grace of feral predators. Their movements, a twitching, jerking parody of Olympic sprinters, bones cracking with the strain of their own violent momentum, mouths agape in a permanent silent scream that only found voice in a rasping snarl when prey was sighted. Our group was a fragile constellation of survivors thrown together by geography and desperation. Myself, a former parkour instructor whose skills had suddenly shifted from hobby to holy grail. Mara, an nurse with eyes that had seen too much, her hands still steady but her soul frayed. Ben, a building superintendent who knew the hidden arteries of the city's infrastructure like the lines on his own palms. And the twins, Chloe and Sam, university students whose world had shrunk from lecture halls to this terrifying open-air prison. We had watched from Ben's top-floor apartment as the streets below became rivers of chaos and death. The ground was a kingdom belonging to them now. The cars were tombs or traps. The buildings were caves that could become crypts in an instant if a door gave way. Ben, his face ashen but his voice firm, had pointed a grimy finger out the window, tracing a path only he could see. "The rooftops," he'd said, the words barely a whisper. "They can't climb, not like we can. The gaps between the buildings on this block are narrow. It's a road they can't follow." The first leap was an act of faith that tore something in my psyche. It wasn't far, maybe 6 feet across a chasm that dropped 10 stories onto a pavement littered with abandoned cars and worse things that moved between them. But the wind in that gap felt like a physical force, hungry to pluck us off balance. I went first, landing in a roll on the gravel of the next roof, my hands stinging. I turned, heart in my throat. Mara threw her medical pack across, then followed, her jump clean and efficient. Ben coaxed the twins, their faces slick with tears. Chloe made it, collapsing into sobs. Sam hesitated, and in that hesitation, we heard the door to Ben's apartment complex splinter downstairs. The sound shot through Sam like a bolt of electricity. He ran, jumped, fell short. His fingers scraped and caught the parapet's edge with a sound that made my stomach drop. Mara and I lunged, grabbing his wrists as his legs kicked wildly over the abyss. Behind him, in the dark window of the apartment we'd just left, a figure slammed against the glass. Not pounding, not testing. It simply ran full force into the barrier. The glass spiderwebbed, a second impact, a third, and then it burst outward in a glittering cascade, and the runner, its arm bent at an impossible angle, its face a mask of blood from the impact, tumbled out into empty space and fell silent until the wet final thud from below. We hauled Sam up, and no one spoke. The rules were written in that moment. Hesitation is death, sound is a liability, and the ground is a grave. So began our high-stakes pilgrimage across the skyline. The city, once a monument to connectedness, became a labyrinth of deadly gaps. We moved from the blessed flat expanses of office buildings to the steep, slippery peaks of old tenements, our world reduced to the texture under our palms and the next foothold. Ben was our prophet, guiding us toward a rumored green zone at the old riverfront warehouse district, a place supposedly fortified by the National Guard in the early hours. It was a shred of hope, a pinprick of light on a dark map. Our progress was measured not in miles, but in buildings conquered. We became creatures of instinct and whisper. The sound of our breathing was our greatest enemy. The scuff of a shoe on gravel sounded like a landslide. Every time we had to descend into a building to cross an unjumpable street or dead transit. As we called them, the air would change. It grew colder, thicker, smelling of mildew and rust, and something else. Something coppery and old. It was during one of these cursed interior transits, in the hollow, echoing stairwell of a parking garage, that we learned the true meaning of their speed. We were creeping down a ramp, the twins holding onto each other, when a plastic bag, caught in some unfelt draft, skittered across the concrete floor. The sound was absurdly loud in the tomb-like silence. And then it came, not from ahead, but from the dark behind us. From a sub-level we thought empty, a clattering, a skittering of nails on concrete, moving faster than any human should be able to in pure darkness. We ran, not with purpose, but with blind, animal panic. Ben led us up a ramp, towards a sliver of grey light. The thing was gaining. I could hear its breath, a ragged sucking sound. Mara screamed, "Here," pointing at a maintenance ladder bolted to the wall, leading up to a rooftop access hatch. We scrambled. I went last, shoving the twins up ahead of me. As I reached for the lowest rung, it erupted from the shadows. Its clothes were torn to rags, its skin a mottled grey, but its eyes, they were fixed, hyper-focused, devoid of anything but a terrifying, intelligent hunger. It didn't try to climb, it jumped. Its hand, fingers broken and twisted, clamped around my ankle like a vice of frozen meat. The cold of it shot through me. I kicked, screamed, and Ben, from above, brought a heavy pipe down on its wrist with a sickening crunch. The grip loosened for a fraction of a second. I tore my leg free and hauled myself up as Mara slammed the heavy metal hatch shut and Ben drove the pipe through the handle, welding it shut. From below, a furious, demented pounding began, the metal denting inward with each blow. We didn't wait to see if it would hold. We ran to the far edge of that roof, the sound of our violated sanctuary ringing in our ears. The hours blurred into a nightmare montage of exertion and terror. We witnessed horrors from our precarious perch. We saw a group of survivors on the street below, trying to move a bus blockade, get overrun in seconds, their screams cut short in a frenzy of motion. We saw runners scaling each other in a macabre pyramid to reach a second-story fire escape. A display of a terrible hive-like problem-solving that chilled me more than any snarl. Our bodies began to betray us. Dehydration made our heads pound. Our muscles trembled with a constant, low-grade fatigue. Chloe developed a blister that burst, leaving her foot raw. Mara sterilized it with the last of her alcohol wipes, her face a mask of professional concern that couldn't hide her despair at our dwindling supplies. The sky cycled through its bruise-colored palette, darkness falling, then reluctantly giving way to a gray, cheerless dawn. Time became elastic, stretching during moments of paralyzing fear and compressing during fleeting bursts of progress. As the 19th hour approached, a new kind of dread set in, the dread of hope. Ben, his lips cracked and bleeding, pointed a trembling finger. There, the riverfront, the warehouse in the distance, we could see it, a massive brick-built structure, its perimeter lined with what looked like shipping containers stacked into walls. Behind razor wire, we could see figures moving. Human figures, walking, not running. A flag not the nation's, but a simple, solid green banner fluttered from the roof. The green zone. It was real. But between us and it lay the final, most terrifying gauntlet, a wide 4-lane boulevard, a canyon of open space they called the Strand. It was completely exposed, littered with the wrecks of a military convoy, and on the other side, the warehouse roof was a full story lower than our current position. It was an impossible jump down. There was only one way: descend to street level, sprint 50 yards across open ground to a point where a collapsed billboard created a ragged sloping bridge to the warehouse roof. 50 yards. In the open, we huddled behind a rooftop HVAC unit. Our debater hissed frantic whisper. It was suicide. It was our only chance. Our energy was gone. We had one sprint left in us. Collectively, as we argued, a new sound rose from the streets below. A low, gathering murmur like the approach of a storm. We peered over the edge. From every side street, every alley, they were converging, drawn perhaps by the distant activity of the green zone, or by some other unknowable signal. A horde was gathering, a slow, churning river of grey flesh and jerking movement that was beginning to fill the Strand. We were out of time. The path would be swallowed. Now or never, Mara said, her voice hollow. She looked at each of us, the nurse making a final triage decision. We run as one, we do not stop. We do not look back. If someone falls, we cannot stop. The descent down the fire escape was a blur of ringing metal. Our feet hit the pavement in the shadow of our building. The smell here was overwhelming: rot, gasoline, death. The din of the horde was 100 yards away and closing. Ben nodded, his old eyes meeting mine. For my family, he whispered. And then we ran. We burst from the shadow into the muted daylight of the boulevard. The open air felt like a physical shock. My legs, rubbery and spent, burned with a new, final burst of adrenaline. The billboard, a twisted skeleton of steel and tattered vinyl, was our mecca. I heard the twins sobbing as they ran. I heard Ben's ragged breath beside me. And then I heard the pitch of the horde's murmur change, a rising wave of recognition, of excitement. A new sound joined it, the individual, piercing shrieks of runners who had broken from the pack, who had seen the fleeting movement and were giving chase. Don't look back. The mantra screamed in my head, don't look back. But the sound was getting closer, the pounding of feet, not just ours, but others, lighter, faster, a horrifying multi-rhythm on the asphalt. 30 yards. The billboard loomed. 20. A snarl, so close it felt like it was inside my own skull. 10. I dared a glance to my side. Mara was flagging, her strength, the strength that had held us together, finally spent. A runner, its jaw unhinged, was at arm's length behind her, reaching. And then Ben was there, with a roar that came from a place I didn't know the quiet super had in him. He turned. He didn't shove Mara. He stepped into the path. He swung his beloved pipe one last time, catching the runner in the temple, slowing it for just a moment. Go, he bellowed, his voice the loudest, clearest sound in the world. And then he was engulfed, not by one, but by 3, 4, and not of them that descended in a whirlwind of terrible motion. His sacrifice bought us 2 seconds, 2 eternities. We reached the base of the collapsed billboard. It was a steep, jagged climb up torn metal. I pushed Chloe, then Sam, up ahead of me. Mara scrambled up, her eyes wide and vacant. Hands from the warehouse roof reached down, grabbing the twins, hauling them to safety. I was the last. As I clawed my way up the final slope, a hand streaked with grease and blood closed around my forearm. I was pulled up and over the parapet, onto the solid, blessed flat roof of the warehouse. I collapsed, my lungs on fire. I rolled over, scrambling to the edge, looking back. The Strand was a seething mass of them. They milled at the base of our improvised bridge, some trying to climb but falling, their coordination insufficient for the unstable wreckage. They stared up with their blank, hungry eyes, a moaning, restless sea. And there, in the midst of them, was no sign of Ben, only the movement of the horde. We had made it. We were inside the green zone, surrounded by the hushed, stunned faces of other survivors, wrapped in coarse blankets, handed warm water that tasted like heaven. We had spent 19 hours sprinting across rooftops, and we had survived. But as I sit here now against this cold warehouse wall, the image burned into my soul is not of the horrors we outran, but of Ben's face in that final moment. Not fear, but a fierce, defiant clarity. And I know, with a certainty that chills me deeper than any nightmare, that our escape was not an ending. The roof was just a temporary haven. The ground, and what walks upon it, is still there, and the noise we've brought to their doorstep, it doesn't just fade away. It echoes. And in this new silent world, echoes are a dangerous, dangerous thing. The real horror I've come to understand isn't the 19 hours of flight. It's the stillness that comes after, the waiting, and the dreadful knowledge that no wall is high enough, and no refuge is forever. The silence inside the warehouse was not peaceful. It was the heavy, dense quiet of collective shock, punctuated by the soft cries of the wounded and the low, tense murmurs of those standing guard at the barricaded windows. The air smelled of sweat, antiseptic, and damp concrete, stark contrast to the open rust and smoke scent of the rooftop world we've just escaped. Blankets were rough, military-issue wool, and the warm water from a canteen tasted of metal and purification tablets. It was ambrosia. I drank until my stomach ached, the physical act anchoring me against the mental replay of Ben's final moments, the wet, tearing sound swallowed by the Horde's chorus. A man with the bearing of a soldier but wearing the torn flannel of a civilian introduced himself as Miller. His eyes were the color of slate and just as hard, scanning us with an appraisal that was less about welcome and more about assessing risk, resource, and burden. "Medic will see to your feet," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse or smoke. "You're on the third watch. 4 hours sleep, then you work. Everyone works, no exceptions." There was no malice in it, just the grim calculus of survival. This was not a sanctuary. It was a fortress under siege, and we had just become part of its garrison. The warehouse was a cavernous space, its high ceiling lost in shadows. Light came from battery-powered camping lanterns, creating islands of pallid illumination in a sea of darkness. Makeshift bunks lined the walls. The central area was a command and triage zone. The walls we'd seen from the roof were indeed shipping containers, stacked too high and filled with gravel, creating a perimeter. Access was a single, heavy steel door, reinforced with welded crossbeams and watched from a sniper's nest constructed in the rafters. The green zone was less a rescue and more a stubborn, precarious foothold. Mara was immediately absorbed into the medical team, her nurse's hands a scarce commodity. The twins, Chloe and Sam, sat huddled together, their shock deepening into a catatonic numbness. I was given a task suited to my cursed skills. I was assigned to the roof runner detail. Our job was to maintain a watch on the warehouse roof and, more critically, to execute supply runs to adjacent, still unlooted buildings via the same rooftop pathways we'd used to get here. The irony was a bitter pill. We had crossed the city to escape the Sky Road, only to be ordered back onto it. Sleep, when it came, was not rest. It was a dark theater where my mind staged relentless replays. The coil-and sprint of the runners, the spiderwebbing glass, the cold, dead vice of the hand around my ankle, Ben's roar. My body would jerk awake, convinced I was falling, only to find myself on a thin mattress on a cold concrete floor, the sounds of the fortress replacing the sounds of the hunt. The 4 hours felt like 4 minutes, and yet, I woke more tired than when I'd closed my eyes. My first shift on the roof was under a leaden, drizzling sky. My partner was a woman named Anya, sinewy and quiet, with a network of faded tattoos on her arms and a perpetual frown. She moved across the gravel with a predator's grace. "You're the parkour guy," she stated, not asking. "Good. The weak ones die quick up here. Slower on the ground, but quicker up here." She pointed to a building about 20 feet away, a lower office complex. "That's the store. It's mostly been picked clean, but the top floor offices might have overlooked supplies. Pharma, mostly. Mara's team needs more antibiotics. The gap is narrow, but the landing is on a slanted glass skylight. You don't land clean, you go through. They can't get up to you if you fall in, but you're trapped. And the things inside, they get creative when they're confined." The run was a simple jump, an echo of 100 others from the day before, but now, the stakes were different. It wasn't for my own escape. It was for the fragile ecosystem of the fortress. Failure meant losing a resource, and resources were the thin thread holding this entire endeavor together. I made the jump, the glass of the skylight groaning but holding under my rolled impact. The office inside was a tomb of normalcy: a desk, a computer, a framed family photo now lying face down. In the drawer, I hit the jackpot: a full, unopened bottle of prescription amoxicillin, a few sleeves of painkillers, and some sealed sterile dressings. As I stuffed them into my pack, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thump coming from the hallway outside the office's locked door. Not frantic, not furious, persistent, deliberate. Thump, pause, thump. I froze, my hand on the desk. A new kind of cold seeped into my bones. This wasn't the mindless pounding we'd heard before. This was testing, probing. I escaped back to the roof, the supplies a heavy bounty in my pack. When I told Anya about the sound, her frown deepened. "They're learning," she said, her voice low. "Or the ones that are left are the clever ones. The initial wave that burned through the population fast. The stupid ones threw themselves off buildings or got trapped. The ones that are left." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Days settled into a grim routine. Watch, run for supplies, sleep, eat the bland, canned food. The world beyond our container walls was a constant, moaning presence. Miller organized a run to try and secure a ham radio from a nearby electronics store, a plan that required a ground team. I was placed on overwatch on the roof with a scoped rifle I barely knew how to use. Watching the team of 4 move, silent and slow, through the corpse-littered street below was an agony of helplessness. They were halfway to the storefront when a runner dropped from a second-story awning, landing directly amidst them. The ensuing chaos was silent from my perch, a pantomime of terror. A man was dragged, screaming, into a doorway. The others scattered. A woman ran back toward the warehouse, straight into the path of 2 more that rounded a corner. I raised the rifle, my hands shaking, the crosshairs jittering over the scene. I didn't fire. I couldn't. I didn't know how to lead a target that moved in such unpredictable jerks, and the risk of hitting the survivor was too high. I watched, paralyzed, as she was brought down. The team lost 2 out of 4 for a radio that, when they finally retrieved it, was water-damaged and useless. The failure hung over the warehouse like a pall. Morale, a flickering candle at best. Gutted, whispers started, born of fear and fatigue. Some argued for packing what they could and making a run for the river, for trying to commandeer boats. Others, led by Miller, argued for hunkering down, for waiting for a rescue that every rational part of our brains knew was never coming. The myth of the green zone had crumbled, revealing it for what it was, a temporary shelter in the eye of a permanent storm. It was on the 7th night that the sound changed. The constant background moan of the horde beyond the walls shifted in tone. It became more focused, a directed murmur that seemed to center on our location. From the sniper's nest, the report came down. "They're piling up at the south wall. Like they're trying to make a ramp." We all rushed to the narrow firing slits carved between the containers. In the gloom, illuminated by the occasional sweep of a handheld spotlight, we saw it. It wasn't organized, not in any human sense, but the runners, driven by some insatiable collective impulse, were climbing onto the wrecks of cars, onto each other, a living, squirming mound of bodies slowly, incrementally, rising against the metal wall. They weren't thinking, they were accumulating, and the pile was growing taller. "They can't coordinate that," Sam whispered, his voice trembling with desperate hope. Anya beside me, her face illuminated in the cold light, shook her head. "They don't need to coordinate. They just need to want what's on the other side enough. And they do." Miller started barking orders, all non-essential to the central mezzanine roof teams. "Hold the high ground. Anyone who can shoot, to the south wall. Aim for the base of the pile. Tried to collapse it." The warehouse erupted into controlled panic. The gunfire started, sharp and loud in the enclosed space, a sound we'd avoided for fear of drawing more of them. It was a confession. We were here, we were alive, and we were fighting back. From the roof, Anya and I watched the sea of them churn below. The pile, despite the bullets tearing into it, continued to grow. It was a grotesque, self-sacrificing architecture. Then, the first hand, fingers bloody and broken, gripped the top edge of the container wall. A head, hair matted with filth, appeared over the rim, its eyes locked onto mine across the roof. It didn't snarl, it simply began to pull its body up. Anya fired. The thing fell back, disappearing into the morass. But another was already there, and another. They were breaching the one barrier we believed was impassable. The sound of gunfire from below was joined by new sound screams, not of the dead, but of the living. The battle was no longer outside, it was inside the walls. Miller's voice crackled over a walkie-talkie, strained and final. Roof runner team. Fallback plan Gamma. You know what to do, now, plan Gamma, the last resort. Anya grabbed my arm, her grip iron. The river. There's a maintenance ladder on the north side, goes down to the old dock. There might be a boat, there might be nothing. It's a chance. What about the others? I yelled over the rising cacophony. They're buying us time, she screamed back, her composure shattering. Don't waste it. We sprinted across the roof, away from the sounds of the breach. Chloe and Sam were already there, Mara beside them, her medical pack replaced by a small backpack of supplies. Her eyes met mine, and in them was no judgment, only the same grim acceptance. The ladder was rusted but solid. One by one we descended into a deeper darkness, the sounds of the fortress dying above us, replaced by the lap of black water against stone pilings and a new, more immediate sound, the soft, wet echoes of movement in the pitch-black tunnel of the dock. We were out of the fortress, we were back in the wild, and as my feet touched the slick dock, I realized with a horrifying clarity that the 19-hour sprint had never ended. It had just been a prelude. The Horde was not just at the gates, it was in the mind. It was the cold truth that every sanctuary is a future trap, every hope a potential source of despair. Our flight was eternal, and somewhere in the dark, ahead of us on the river or behind us in the fallen fortress, a new rhythm was picking up, the relentless, hungry rhythm of the hunt. We had escaped the rooftops. Now we had to learn to run on water. That's it for this episode. Thanks for being here. If you got chills from this story, hit like and subscribe for more dark tales. Your support keeps the frights coming. Until next time, stay hidden, stay cautious, and trust nothing.